I'd finally finished packing for a week-long fishing trip with two of my closest friends. I was excited but had a few lingering doubts. My friends and I have been tight since elementary school, practically like brothers, and we've always cherished our time together. But this trip felt different. For years, we'd done everything as a group, with our wives always by our side. When we were younger, we even dated each other's girlfriends before we all settled down. Originally, all three couples planned on coming. Mark had to drop out last minute because of a big meeting, so his wife, Shelley, decided to stay back too. Then, a couple of days before we were set to leave, Wes found out he had a meeting on Friday, so his wife decided to skip it as well. When Beverly, my wife, heard that the other wives wouldn't be joining, she also opted out. It wasn't shaping up to be the kind of vacation I was used to, and I was pretty disappointed. Usually, we'd all go together, have a great time, and, honestly, the best part for me was the extra closeness Beverly and I always seemed to have before, during, and after our trips. Truth be told, I was more frustrated about missing out on that than on the fishing. Even so, Beverly and I had enjoyed an amazing week of intimacy before the trip, almost to the point of exhaustion. At times, I would have preferred to catch a few extra hours of sleep, but she was determined. This was our typical pre-trip routine, which I looked forward to because, usually, our physical life was sporadic, to put it mildly. On average, we'd be close maybe twice a week, but it always seemed rushed, like her mind was somewhere else. This was a far cry from when we first got married, back when we'd sneak away anytime we found even a moment of privacy. The decline had crept in slowly over the years but became painfully clear about 5 years ago. That summer, we went from being physically close nearly every day, sometimes twice, to maybe 2 or 3 times a week. Often, I'd try to initiate, but Beverly would turn me down. At first, I was pretty frustrated, but after a few minor arguments, I gave up trying. When it had been long enough, I'd just take matters into my own hands. That Thursday night, I found myself in the office, unwinding with a beer and taking a short break from packing. Beverly was upstairs putting the kids to bed, then slipped down to the kitchen. A few minutes later, she joined me in the living room, glass of wine in hand. She settled in next to me, took a sip, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Honey," she started, her tone serious, "I need to talk to you, and I need you to really listen." Her face looked tense, almost scared. "I know what I'm about to say could make you mad, but please, let me finish before you say anything. I'll answer any questions afterward. I should have told you sooner, but I needed to work through some things first." A strange, uneasy feeling crept over me. Beverly looked almost pitiful, nervous but determined. She took a deep breath and another sip of her wine, then went on. "I know you haven't been happy with our physical life these past few years. To be honest, neither have I, Kerry. I love you, but you just don't spark that same desire in me anymore. I don't want this to hurt our marriage, I really don't. You're an amazing dad, a great provider, and my best friend. But I need something more, something you just can't give me." I felt anger bubbling up inside, my mind reeling. What was she saying? Sure, I knew she'd been distant, but what was all that intimacy last week about? I opened my mouth to protest, but Beverly held up her hand. "Kerry, you promised to let me finish," she reminded me firmly. Swallowing my frustration, I clamped my mouth shut and leaned back, listening. "Kerry, I met someone," she continued, her voice steady but soft. "It's someone I've known for a while, and there's just something about him. I can't go back to how things were. I want to be with him, and I didn't want to lie to you or go behind your back. I still care about you, but I need this. With him, I feel alive, like I did when we first got married. I can't get enough of that feeling." I shot up from my chair, fury coursing through me. "Are you serious? You're telling me you're cheating on me?" Beverly calmly reached out, pushing me gently back into my seat. "Kerry, stop. I told you that you wouldn't like this, but you agreed to listen. So, sit down and listen." I stayed there, seething, trying to keep myself in check as she went on. "I talked to Wes about the legal stuff. You know I'd get at least 2/3 of your income in alimony and child support if we divorced. The kids and I would keep the house, and you'd get half the savings and your retirement. You'd struggle financially, and the kids would be caught in a broken home. So, for their sake, for all of our sakes, I'm asking you to accept this." She looked at me, her eyes oddly sincere. "I still care about you, and nothing has to change. We'll still be intimate, Just maybe not as much as before. But you need to know that some nights, I'll be out with him, and sometimes, I'll take trips with him. Sitting there in shock, I felt my anger boiling over. After a long pause, I managed, I thought I knew you, Beverly. I thought you loved me. And now, you're tearing my heart out. How long has this been going on? Who is this guy? Beverly looked at me sharply, a hint of irritation in her voice. Kerry, insulting me won't get you anywhere. I hope you can get over this grudge and that we can carry on as we've been for years. But I'm not giving you any more details, no dates, no places, no names. It's none of your business, and if you try to dig into it, there'll be consequences. She paused, letting her words sink in, and then continued. I've had another lover before this, and I'm tired of hiding. You need to hear it from me because I can't keep sneaking around. I need nights with him, and this way, you can be home to take care of the kids while I take care of my needs. I stood there, stunned, as Beverly kept going, calmly but firmly. I'm not telling you who he is because I know you try something reckless and end up hurt or in jail. The kids need you, you're our stability. If you push to no, you'll face the consequences. I've set up measures to make sure of it. The ease with which she laid out her plan took me aback. It was clear she'd been preparing for this. I said, well, I'd better call the guys and let them know I won't be coming on this trip. We need to settle a few things here. I reached for my phone, but Beverly caught my hand. No, Kerry, you're going on this trip, she said, her voice unwavering. The kids will go to your parents' place as planned, and I'm not staying here alone for 2 weeks. You need this time away to adjust. If you try to change plans, you'll regret it. We have eyes and ears everywhere. If you dig for answers or disrupt things, I'll know, and you'll pay the price. Accept this arrangement, and I'll make sure things don't have to get worse for you. Beverly walked over to the desk, pulled out a thick envelope from a drawer, and handed it to me. Here. This is a report on your activities over the past month. Read it, and you'll understand that we're aware of everything. If you try to interfere with my plans, I will make sure your life is destroyed. She turned to head upstairs. Now, I'm going to bed. If you want to join me, that's your choice. Nothing needs to change, Kerry, unless you force it to. I sank into a chair, feeling the weight of her words. Who was this woman? What had happened to the wife I thought I knew? She seemed like a stranger, a calculating, cold stranger. I opened the envelope, leafing through pages and pages of detailed notes that included moments I barely remembered myself. The level of detail was disturbing, with records of things like a small stain on my shirt or a casual glance at a woman passing by. It must have cost her a fortune to get this level of surveillance, and it raised even more questions. Was she connected to someone powerful, someone wealthy, maybe even dangerous? 2 hours later, I finished reading, and a wave of unease settled in. They knew things that only I should know. Was I being tracked? Was there a bug somewhere on me, or was it all just part of a twisted game she was playing? Beverly came back downstairs, looking at me with a calmness that only fueled my anger. Well, Kerry, are you coming to bed, or are you going to sit here sulking all night? She turned and headed to our bedroom without waiting for an answer. I stayed on the sofa, my mind too consumed to follow her. The next morning, Beverly's tone was sharp as she woke me. Get up, Kerry. You need to get organized and ready for work before the kids realize you didn't sleep in our room last night. When you get back from your trip, I expect you to act normal. If you push for a separation or disrupt this family, you know what's at stake. I'm willing to meet your needs on occasion, but I expect you to pull your weight in this marriage. If you find another woman, I'll divorce you without a second thought. My anger flared, and I finally let loose. What the hell, Beverly? You expect me to be okay with all of this while you go around with some other guy, but I don't get the same freedom? I wasn't planning to, but why do you get to decide it's fair for you and not for me? She looked at me with a smirk. Kerry, let's be honest. You know what I'm offering is plenty for your needs. If you seek someone else, it'd just be to spite me. And if you can't fulfill your part of the marriage, then why shouldn't I look elsewhere? My voice shook with frustration as I replied, you've never once told me you wanted something different or more. How was I supposed to know something was missing if you acted like everything was fine? I always made sure you were satisfied. I never realized you thought anything was lacking. She stood there, unbothered, and replied, Kerry, if you have to ask, it shows just how out of touch you are. It's not about quantity, it's about quality. You never understood what I needed, and eventually, I stopped believing you ever would." I felt crushed, barely able to form a response. I staggered up to start my morning routine, running on autopilot. At breakfast, our son, Ryan, noticed my mood. "Dad, is something wrong?" he asked. I opened my mouth, but Beverly cut me off with a quick response. "Your dad's just worried about a little work issue. I'm sure he'll be back to normal after the holidays." She shot me a look that silenced me instantly, then returned to her breakfast. Later at work, I decided not to follow Beverly's suggestion and canceled the trip. I'd been set to leave right after work and meet everyone at Chuck's house, where we'd load up my SUV with gear and head out. Pete was supposed to ride with me, while Wes would take his own car since he needed to return midweek. I called Pete to let him know I'd changed my plans and offered to let him use my truck if needed. But Pete interrupted me, sounding firm. "Oh no, Kerry. That's not happening. I just got off the phone with Beverly, and she said you might try to pull something like this. She mentioned you've been stressed lately, and she even talked to your assistant to confirm you had nothing urgent planned. I promised her I'd make sure you went on this trip, and if necessary, I'll drag you there myself. So, you're coming, and you're going to enjoy it." I was about to protest, but a pang of worry stopped me cold. What if Pete was in on this, too? Beverly had mentioned plans with her new guy, and Pete was supposed to come with me, but Wes was staying home and joining us midweek. Could it be him? Or was someone else tangled up in this mess? I felt trapped, knowing I had to be careful. I needed a way to monitor things, maybe set up some cameras, but even that could be tricky. From the report, I could tell Beverly had been tracking my purchases and phone calls. I had to be smart and cautious, but the weight of this new reality was almost too much to bear. They were even tracking my cash withdrawals. They'd catch any unusual expense I made overnight. I sat at my desk, lost in thought, when my phone rang. Beverly's voice was on the other end, sharp and cutting as she wasted no time. "Kerry, I told you to go on this trip and not to dig into my personal life. Pete just called me and said you tried to cancel. This is your last warning, don't try to contact me or ask questions, or you'll be out on the street, and you'll never see the kids again. Am I clear?" She slammed the phone down before I could respond, leaving me frozen in shock. Pete had reported me. Was he involved in this, or was he just trying to look out for me? Lately, none of my friends felt as close as they once did. It was like they were more Beverly's friends than mine, like she somehow had them on her side. But could they really all be in on this? No, that couldn't be, or could it? Deciding not to push my luck, I went along with the trip and met the guys at Denny's for dinner. They were their usual lively selves, joking and laughing, while I mostly sat there, brooding. Eventually, Wes noticed and asked, "Kerry, what's going on? You've been a bit off lately." I looked up at him and, after a moment's hesitation, muttered, "Beverly's got some crazy idea in her head, and I don't know how to handle it. Part of me can't believe she's serious, but if she is, well, my marriage is probably over." Pete exchanged a look with Wes. "Look, man, Beverly called me this morning, asking me to make sure you came along on this trip. She said you've been difficult to be around lately and really need some time away to clear your head. I told her we'd make sure you got here and enjoyed yourself." Wes nodded, looking me over. "Yeah, I've noticed you've been a bit on edge these last few months, Kerry. You haven't been yourself. Maybe this trip is just what you need. We can kick back, have some laughs, and get your mind off things. I even brought your favorite whiskey." He gave me a nudge, trying to get a rise out of me. "Come on, buddy, nothing's ever kept us from the cabin before. Sure, the ladies won't be around this time, but that just means we can relax even more. Drink, lie a bit, it's our time." They managed to coax me along, and soon we headed up to the stream where we'd planned to fish. It was only a couple of hours' drive, so we arrived just in time for a drink before turning in for the night. The next morning, they were eager to start fishing, and I tried to keep my mind off everything. But by the time we got back to the cabin, thoughts of Beverly crept back in. I still couldn't believe what she told me, but it gnawed at me all the same. That evening, after dinner, we were sitting around with drinks when Wes glanced over, looking concerned. "Kerry, you've got the look of a man who's lost his best friend, and I know that's not true, I'm right here. What's eating at you, man?" Figuring I might lose my mind if I didn't talk to someone, I decided to open up. These guys had been my closest friends since grade school, and if anyone could give me sound advice, it was them. I laid it all out, how things had been fading over the past few years, the growing distance in our marriage, and then Beverly's bombshell revelation last Thursday. When I'd finished, Wes leaned back, clearly stunned. "Kerry, are you sure that's what she said? I mean, I can't believe Beverly would even think something like that. We've known her for years, and she's always been so sweet and caring." "Yeah, I thought the same thing," I replied. "But that's exactly what she said, as best as I remember." Hard to wrap my head around it, but she was dead serious. Pete rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Well, Kerry, I can't say what would happen if you went through with a divorce, but I'll be honest, you'd have a lot to think about. If she's serious, you really have to decide how to respond. Breaking up the family would definitely impact the kids, and the courts usually favor the mother in custody battles. Unless you could prove she's unfit, you'd probably lose custody. You'd have to keep up with child support until they're grown, plus any college expenses. Since she doesn't work, you'd likely owe her alimony until she remarries, and then there's the house. Either she'd get it, or you'd have to sell and split the proceeds. Your retirement savings, at least half would go to her." Hearing all of this from Pete, who's an attorney, felt worse than hearing it from Beverly herself. My stomach sank as I realized how trapped I'd be if I went through with it. But I need to know who she's seeing. She won't tell me, but I need to know. When I find out, I'll make sure she doesn't see him again, I said, barely containing my frustration. Pete sighed and shook his head. "Kerry, as a friend, I get where you're coming from. But as an officer of the court, I'm obligated to tell you that if you do anything to her lover, I'll have to report it. My advice is to let it go. Don't let her cheating drive you to do something you'll regret." I glared at him, frustrated. "So, that's it? You're telling me to just roll over and accept it? What would you do if Shelley pulled something like this on you, threatening you the way Beverly's doing to me?" Pete looked uncomfortable, pausing before replying, "Honestly, I'd probably be as angry as you are. But I know Shelley wouldn't do something like that. She loves me and knows I'm the best partner she'll ever have. We have a solid life, and I don't think she'd risk that. But if I were in your shoes, I'd seriously consider my options. Anger won't help you in the long run. Kerry, you might just have to accept your fate," Pete said, his tone oddly casual. "If Beverly has someone watching your every move as closely as it seems, based on that report she gave you, you're out of luck. If you dig around to find out who she's with, she'll know, and there'll be consequences. It sounds like she's pushed you to a point where she'd catch wind of even this conversation. I mean, she knew where we were headed, right?" "Damn, I didn't think about that," he muttered, looking concerned. I noticed an odd look on Pete's face, and Wes, too, had this strange, satisfied expression the whole time we'd been talking. I couldn't wrap my head around why they seemed so unfazed by Beverly's betrayal. Finally, I shrugged it off, raising my glass. "Well, forget it. Let's just have another drink." The next morning, I woke up before the other two and decided I needed some time to myself. I took my fishing gear and hiked upstream to my favorite spot. I was just about to cast my line when my cell phone rang. Reception was usually spotty here, so I was surprised it even worked. Seeing Beverly's name on the screen, I let it go to voicemail. Once I saw she'd left a message, I played it back, and her words rattled me. "Well, honey, my friends tell me you got some really sound advice from Wes last night. I hope you're planning to take it. You're a good man and an even better provider and father, but if you do anything rash, I'll move on just fine. Now go enjoy yourself." The message ended, and I stared at the phone in disbelief. There was no way she could have known what we'd talked about unless she'd been listening somehow. I hadn't even considered that she might have bugged me. Unbeknownst to me, Pete and Wes had been watching from the edge of the trees as I listened to the message. They shared a knowing grin and gave each other a thumbs up before slipping back through the woods toward the cabin. As they walked, Pete turned to Wes and said, "So, you think this'll do the trick, or should we keep tightening the screws?" Wes chuckled, "Let's keep up the pressure for another month or two. If we keep feeding him the right kind of advice and showing him there's no point in resisting, we'll have him right where we want him. Just imagine how much easier it'll be to enjoy our time with Beverly when we don't have to worry about sneaking around as much." Pete laughed, "Yeah, and if he goes spilling the beans to his wife or anyone else, we'll just keep telling them we're trying to help him out. It's the perfect cover." While I was out fishing until noon, my thoughts kept drifting back to my marriage and the need to find out who Beverly was with. I wanted to end things, but I knew I couldn't take action until I had some solid answers. Meanwhile, back at the cabin, Beverly had settled in comfortably with her mystery lover. She had spent the day with him, her passion obvious, and was clearly waiting for the others to arrive. "Oh, I've needed this for so long. I can't wait for the rest of the guys to get here. West should be joining us by Wednesday, right?" Her companion smiled. "That's right, sweetheart. And that means you'll have both of us for 2 full nights before you have to go back to babysitting your adoring husband." He smirked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, I'll be so glad when all 3 of us can be together at once," Beverly sighed. "I hate having to split my time. After all that's happened, Kerry could never satisfy me again. We've taken care of all the details, right? I mean, he's a wonderful provider and an amazing father, and I don't want to lose him." The man nodded. "Yeah, I think we have everything covered. But I just hope he doesn't start talking to other people and causing problems. We've had a good thing going for 3 years now. Maybe we should have been content with how things were, but, well, the chance to spend full weekends and evenings with you without any of these restrictions is worth it. Just don't put too much heat on OL Kerry. He might turn into a real problem if he catches wind of everything." "Good thing we've made him look bad to everyone," Beverly replied. "If he ever finds out and tries to expose us, no one will believe him. I've checked over all his finances like we discussed. I can't limit his check writing, but I've had the bank put restrictions on his cash withdrawals. And, honestly, I kind of regret urging him to hire that assistant. She's been way too effective, which is a bit inconvenient." Beverly giggled and said, "If I hadn't arranged things to stay home, we wouldn't be able to enjoy ourselves like this, would we? Just seeing you a few evenings a month or during occasional trips wasn't cutting it. Now, I get to be with you whenever I want, thanks to this little plan." Meanwhile, I sat by the river, staring into the water. My friends tried their best to cheer me up, but nothing seemed to break my mood. They got me drunk on Tuesday night, and once I was out cold, Pete and Wes slipped out onto the porch to talk in hushed voices. "I'm starting to get worried about Kerry," Pete said, sounding tense. "We've been talking to him for 4 days now, and if anything, he's more determined than ever to leave Beverly and get back at her new guy. He's wound up tight, he could snap. How do we keep control of this? It all sounded so easy when we planned to keep him under our thumb and get her to ourselves more often. What if he figures it out and tells our wives?" Wes shrugged. "Relax, Pete. I've got this. Worst case, she actually goes through with a divorce, and so what? She only wanted to keep Kerry because he's a pushover. I enjoy our time together while she's married, but it'd be almost as fun without the marriage. We just have to keep him in the dark and make sure our wives don't find out." In my half-asleep state, I caught snippets of their conversation from inside the cabin. I couldn't hear much, but I could tell they were irritated that I hadn't accepted Beverly's infidelity and were planning to convince me otherwise. My anger grew, not just at her but at them, too. I drifted back to sleep, telling myself I'd handle this without their so-called help. Over the next few days, I distanced myself from them more and more. Pete and West seemed genuinely worried, especially when I told them, "I'll find out who she's sneaking around with, and they'll pay for it. I guarantee it." When it was time to head home, Pete rode with me, and we sat in silence. Wes drove separately, and as soon as he had cell service, he called Wes. Meanwhile, Wes and Beverly sat in my living room, listening to Wes give them the rundown. "He's seething with anger," Wes reported. "If anything, he's even more determined to make us pay. I'd say we need to back off a bit and let him cool down. If he catches on, we're all in trouble." Beverly sat there, visibly shaken, tears streaking her face. Wes' jaw was clenched, his face flushed with anger. After Wes hung up, Wes turned to Beverly, pulling her close. "Don't worry, Beverly. I didn't want to go hard unless I had to, but it looks like we're out of options. Let's see how things go this weekend, and if he's still acting out by Sunday night, we'll file the paperwork on Monday. I can freeze his accounts, both personal and business, with the right court orders. We'll make sure he can't do anything drastic." Late Friday night, I returned home, only to find Beverly waiting for me in the living room. Her eyes were red as if she'd been crying, but she looked calm, almost like she'd just finished an intimate evening. She wore one of my shirts and little else, and I could tell she wanted me to notice. Passing through the room, I saw telltale signs of her escapades on her skin, and my anger nearly boiled over. She looked at me, almost daring me to say something. I met her gaze, silent, then turned and walked past her without a word. She followed me into the bedroom, and when I stepped into the shower, she tried to join me. I pushed her away. "Get out," I said firmly. "I came home hoping we could work through this, but seeing you tonight made it clear that's impossible. You may try to ruin me, but I will find a way to get my revenge on you and whoever else is involved." After showering, I quickly gathered whatever belongings I could fit in my truck. Beverly stood in the hallway, watching me, phone in hand. I caught snippets of her conversation, and one of the last things I tried to do before leaving was log into our joint account on the computer. I was locked out. She'd changed the password. My jaw clenched in frustration as I turned to see her watching, an almost regretful look on her face. "I was hoping you'd come to your senses before it came to this," she said. "You're making a big mistake, Kerry. I love you more than any man I've ever known, and I don't want to lose you. But if you keep pushing, you'll lose everything, the business, everything we've worked for. Just so you know, I've hired Wes as my lawyer. I just spoke with him, and he knows how you've been acting." I couldn't believe it. Wes had been my lawyer and friend since he started practicing, yet here he was, siding with her. Without a word, I left the house and drove to my office. I planned to stay there for the time being, using the conference room as a makeshift living space. When I reached the office complex, I stopped by the security gate and spoke to the guard. "I'm dealing with some personal issues. My wife and her companion have threatened me. I need you to arrange for additional security and keep unauthorized individuals off the property." The next morning, around 10, I left the complex to grab breakfast, only to be stopped at the gate. A man approached me, confirmed my name, and handed me an envelope. "You've been served," he said, walking away. Inside the envelope, I found a restraining order barring me from coming within 100 meters of Beverly, the kids, or our home. The documents also included a court order requiring approval for any personal or business expenses, effectively freezing my finances until the divorce proceedings started on Monday. After breakfast, I drove to my assistant's house. When she opened the door, she looked at me with concern. "Kerry, you look terrible. What happened?" "I need someone to talk to," I said, struggling to hold myself together. I didn't know where else to go. "Sorry to show up on the weekend, but I don't know who I can trust right now." She stepped back, holding the door open. "Come in, Kerry. Can I get you some coffee?" I followed her into the kitchen, where her husband was sitting at the table, clearly surprised by the unexpected visit. Brunch was half finished, with plates of eggs still on the table. I took a step back, feeling like I'd intruded. "I'm sorry. I'll go." Her husband looked up, studying my face. "Kerry, you look like hell. Sit down and talk to us. Whatever's going on, you don't have to handle it alone." I opened up to Hank and Penny, telling them everything that had gone down since that awful Thursday almost 2 weeks ago. I don't even know what to do next or how to get out of this mess. My so-called best friends have spent the past 2 weeks trying to convince me to let Beverly carry on with this affair. They keep saying, if it's been going on for years without you noticing, why rock the boat? And Wes, my ex-best friend, is now Beverly's lawyer, setting up all kinds of legal blocks against me. I can't even touch my own money without court approval, which won't come through until at least Monday. This morning, every single one of my credit cards declined when I tried to pay for breakfast. Penny looked stunned. "Kerry, I can't believe Beverly would do this to you." She turned to Hank. "If you need a place to stay, Kerry, we've got a spare room. And Hank, could we lend him a little money so he can get by for now?" Hank nodded, and I sat there, elbows on the table, head down, feeling more helpless and furious than ever, but a grim resolve was building inside me. After a few moments, Hank said, "If everything you're saying is true, Kerry, you need some serious help. But we should make sure you don't have a bug on you." He gave me a pointed look. "Come with me." He led me to the basement and stopped at the bottom of the stairs. "Kerry, let's be safe. Take off your clothes. I'll grab you something of mine to wear and put your things outside. Clean up in the shower here, and when you're ready, we'll talk." Once I'd changed, we huddled in a concrete room under the stairs. I started explaining everything again, feeling ridiculous but hoping I wasn't being overheard. Hank and Penny took notes, and for the next hour, we hashed out a plan. Hank agreed to reach out to some contacts who might be able to help, and we decided that, for now, I'd rely on Hank and Penny financially. Sunday found me having lunch with Hank and Penny while Beverly, Wes, and Pete had gathered at my house. After they'd worn each other out, they lounged around. Pete finally spoke up, sounding tense. I'm starting to think we're pushing it. What if Kerry finds out and decides to confront us? Maybe we should back off a bit. Calm down, Pete, Wes replied, shrugging. We've got Kerry locked down. He can't even access his own money. We're watching him constantly, and right now, he's probably crying over his coffee at Hank's place. If he tries anything, we'll know before he's a block away. As they continued, none of them noticed the man outside who was filming their every word and action through the window. Monday morning, I began looking for a lawyer. Without Wes, who had always handled my legal work, I felt completely lost. After several interviews, I chose Georgina Edison. She made an excellent impression and came highly recommended. The first thing she did was file motions to unfreeze my business accounts, so I'd have enough money to live on. She even hired a private investigation firm to track Beverly, set up wiretaps at the house, and install video surveillance. I told Georgina to go ahead with divorce proceedings on the grounds of infidelity. That evening, Hank handed me the footage he'd captured the day before. Watching it, my heart sank, and I felt a surge of anger. All three of my so-called friends were involved with Beverly. At least now, I knew exactly who I was up against. The next morning, I went to my office and made 5 copies of the CD. I sent one to each of my friends' wives, another to Georgina, and kept one for myself, locking the original in a safety deposit box. Then, I uploaded the videos to several pay-per-view sites, using everyone's real names. And, since Wes had once given me the keys to his office, I set up the site from there, ensuring that when it got traced, Wes would be the one facing the consequences. To make sure Beverly's friends and family got the full picture, I sent similar videos and photos through email, all from a computer at the local college library. I knew I'd be nearly impossible to trace. Those computers needed student logins, but I always found one left on, which made it easy to use someone else's account. On Wednesday, I fielded countless calls from people who'd seen the videos. That evening, Beverly called, her voice shaking with tears. How could you do this, Kerry? I thought you loved me. I told you it was just because you couldn't meet my needs. How could you ruin me like this? I laughed coldly. Beverly, I didn't ruin you, you did that yourself. I'm just following through on the consequences I warned you about. Now I realize you've probably been at this for years. The times you thought I wasn't home and came back late. It all makes sense now. By the time I'm done, you'll regret ever crossing me. Later, my sister Eva called. So, big brother, I see you finally figured out the truth about your perfect wife. I guess you sent out that video? I had no idea she was hooking up with all 3 of them. Looks like you're learning something new every day. Her laugh was bitter as she hung up. Then Wes called. As soon as I answered, he launched into a rant, yelling insults and threats. You're an idiot, Kerry. By the time I'm through with you, you'll regret ever crossing me. I'll be with your precious wife anytime I want, and I'll take most of your money, too. If you'd only listen, you'd still have your family, your money, and a life worth living. But now? Now you'll end up scraping by in the gutter when I'm done. Beverly's parents also called, her mother tearfully asking, Kerry, how could you do this to her? I know she hurt you, but spreading these images everywhere, that was so extreme. Couldn't you have handled it in a more civilized way? By the end of the day, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. I knew I still had a fight ahead, but at least I'd struck back. And with the advanced answering system I'd had installed at my company, I knew I'd have every word recorded for when I needed it. When I first bought that advanced phone answering system for the business, I didn't think it would end up being a key tool in exposing Wes. Back then, he was still my lawyer and friend, advising me to get the system installed for call security. The setup was pretty simple. Each time a call came in, it would answer with a recorded message, "Thank you for calling Central Inventory Logistics and Security. All calls are recorded for later use. If you don't want your call recorded, please hang up now." If the caller stayed on, the line would record them. Anyone who ignored the warning had agreed to being recorded, plain and simple. It turned out that Wes either hadn't paid attention to the warning or was so angry that he'd missed it, and every threat and boast he made was captured on tape. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd insisted I have the telecom operator program that message, and now it was his words being used as evidence. The sense of justice was almost satisfying. Once the divorce case began, though, Beverly's little crew backed off fast. Lucky for me, Hank's friend had already captured all the damning video and audio that first Saturday, otherwise, the private investigators I'd hired didn't get much. There were a few incriminating calls here and there, but they were vague at best, mostly useless for the case. Georgina wasted no time. One of her first moves was to report Wes to the state bar. His threats and unethical behavior led to an immediate suspension and, ultimately, he was disbarred for life. It didn't erase everything, but knowing he couldn't practice law again felt like a win. My divorce went through quickly after that, and Beverly came out with much less than she'd hoped, just 25% of our assets, while I retained control of the company. The judge awarded me custody of our children, largely due to a critical photo Hank's friend had captured. It was almost by accident. He'd been taking pictures of Beverly and the guys in our living room and ended up catching my 8-year-old daughter peeking in through the patio door, witnessing it all. When the judge saw the photo, he ruled in my favor, and custody went to me. My lawsuits against Wes were equally successful, and I won about $1.3 million in damages. The charges included his violation of attorney-client privilege and the blatant conflict of interest when he took on Beverly as a client. Between his court losses and his wife, Shelley, cleaning him out in their own divorce, Wes was left nearly bankrupt. Mark and Shelley divorced as well, and she got most of his assets. Pete and Jessica, however, didn't separate. Turns out, she'd been involved in their little arrangements all along and was a willing participant in their escapades. But Pete's patience wore thin, especially when Wes and Mark started staying with him and monopolizing Jessica. One night, things came to a head, and Pete attacked them. Wes and Mark fought back hard enough to land Pete in the hospital. Charges were filed, and both Wes and Mark were sentenced to a year in prison. That incident finally led to Pete and Jessica's divorce. Nearly a year after it all settled, I sat in my office, going over the latest news about Wes, Mark, and Pete's fight over Jessica, when Penny looked up from the article and asked, "Have you spoken to Beverly at all? I know she can visit the kids under court supervision." I shook my head. "No, we only talk when absolutely necessary, and that's only when it's about the kids. If I could avoid even that, I would. For years, I thought she was the one, and then, I don't know. It still baffles me why she did what she did. I can't understand how a woman who loved her husband could do that." Penny sat quietly as I opened a drawer and pulled out an old folder, sliding it across the desk. "I don't know why I kept this letter," I admitted. "I don't even know why I agreed to read it. But do you remember about 7 months ago, when Beverly's mother came in here, crying? She handed me this letter and insisted that I read it. So, I did." Penny opened the folder and read Beverly's words. "My dear Kerry, I know you don't believe I have any right to call you that anymore, but you're still the only man I've ever loved. I know I've lost you forever, but I have to tell you what's in my heart. I never meant to hurt you. I never planned to cheat, but I did. You probably remember how close I was to Wes and Pete when we were all in high school, and you never seemed to mind back then. The first time I cheated was almost an accident. It was on our 9th anniversary. You had to work late on a major theft case, and I went to Wes and Shelley's Valentine's Day party alone. I drank too much and ended up in a bad spot. Shelley asked Wes to drive me home, with Mark following to bring him back. In the car, Wes started bringing up memories of our high school days, and by the time we reached the house, I'd already lost any sense of judgment. I told them to stop at first, but they kept reminding me of old times, and eventually, I gave in. That night, we were together for nearly an hour. I won't lie, Kerry, I enjoyed it. Maybe it was because there were 2 of them, keeping me completely involved. After that, it kept happening. At least once a month if we could sneak away. I know you noticed how I'd sometimes disappear during those weekend getaways. Then Wes suggested the open marriage idea, saying it would keep things from blowing up. I was convinced you'd never risk losing the kids or our life together, so I agreed to his plan. I'm so sorry, Kerry, for all of it. I was weak. I was selfish. I'm begging you, please forgive me for being so selfish. Yours forever, Beverly." When Penny finished, she looked up, her eyes glistening, her jaw tight with anger. "Kerry, I think Beverly did love you, in her own twisted way. And I think Wes manipulated her from the start. We've both heard the rumors about him over the years, and I wouldn't be surprised if he got her drunk on purpose." I nodded. "I know, Penny. But even if there's some truth to her story, I can't be sure it's the whole truth. Beverly was always more drawn to Wes than I ever liked. We'd sometimes argue after parties because I thought she was being too friendly, but I never said anything that would lead to a big fight. After I finally caught her, thanks to you and Hank, I even got a DNA test on the kids. You can't imagine the relief I felt when I knew they were mine. I sighed, looking down. Maybe she thinks she loves me, but I don't believe it was real. For her, it was more about comfort and convenience. I was a good provider and a good father, so it was easy to stay with me. But I think I was just her last resort. I loved her deeply, but I don't think she ever felt the same. She only cared about her pleasure and her needs. I looked out the window, letting the words sink in. It's strange, Penny. I always thought I'd be alone after all this, but if I could just find someone real, someone who wouldn't betray me, I think I'd be ready to start again.